My name is Beatrice Rios and I'm going to be the moderator today. Before we jump into the conversation, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping rules. First of all, this session is being live streamed in our pages of Facebook and YouTube, the pages of the PES, Party of European Socialist Group, at the European Committee of the Region. So if you have a colleague, a friend, a family member that might be interested in this discussion about access to housing in the European Union, make sure that you share with them the link, or that you share them in social media for those who didn't have the time to register but would like to be part of this conversation. We also encourage you to use the hashtag Housing for All and Progressive Housing Week, so that you can join the conversation, share your ideas, your thoughts about the debate that we will be having today. Now, the housing crisis is not new in the European Union. We've been struggling with those issues for many, many years. At the moment, more than 80 million people in Europe are affected by the housing crisis. And we all know that one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic has been that need to stay at home, and sometimes these difficulties in accessing the home or not having a home at all are just making way more difficult for people to handle this pandemic, but also the socioeconomic crisis that has been resulting from the lockdown measures that were imposed to limit the spread of the disease are going to have an impact as well in the access of housing for people. Those are the many topics we would like to discuss today with our speakers. I am extremely glad to have the opportunity to have today with me such an incredible panel. What we would like to do in this first panel session is to have a conversation between the civil society and the representatives of the European Union. In this case, we are extremely lucky to have with us today Executive Vice President of the European Commission for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, who will be having a conversation with three amazing speakers. We will have with us Frederick Herten, who is an award-winning director and the director of the documentary about the housing crisis, Push. We will have with us as well Leilani Farhan, who was the former the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, and she's the global director of Shift, an organization that is focusing on housing as well. And we will have as well Saskia Sashen, who is a professor of sociology and a former chair of the Committee on Global Thought of the Columbia University. She's been writing a lot about this problem. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to ask, first of all, to Frederick. You have directed Push, this documentary that looks into why we can't afford to live in our cities anymore. And I was wondering, what is it that struck you the most when you were producing this documentary? And what was the thing that people were telling you about that for you was harder to handle? What were those issues that people are facing in access to housing in Europe and beyond Europe?
It was actually an amazing learning experience making this film, because I didn't know everything when I started, and I still keep learning, so it's kind of normal, I guess. What struck me mostly was the big change on the housing market globally after the financial crisis 2008. I understood suddenly that we had totally new actors on the ground in countries all over the world. These big hedge funds that came almost from nowhere. I mean, Blackstone, who is now the biggest player, they entered 2012 into the housing market. So before they had nothing, and now they're the biggest landlord on the planet. So it's a big change, and that change is felt everywhere. I mean, also in smaller cities. In my own city, Malmö, Sweden, we can feel it. So this kind of financialization is now a big thing, and I'm happy that that the European Parliament is showing the film, and that you're actually now getting to talk about these issues, because I was shocked, and I was also shocked because I'm a journalist, and I found out that most people didn't know. I didn't know. Politicians didn't know. None of us really understood what was cooking out there. And of course, it's been an amazing journey together with Leilani Farah, trying to understand this. And then we met the amazing Saskia Sasson, who could help us even deeper understand it, than Professor Stiglitz and so on. But it's a good time now to act, because we have a new financial crisis that could even more strengthen the same powers that are now dominating the housing sector, or we could fight them back. So it's like a good moment, and it's, for me, I think it's time for politics. The only answer we have is more politics, because they want less politics. They don't want anybody to mess with their business, but I think we must.
I think it's indeed the goal of this whole week of workshops that we're going to have over the next few days is actually moving from words to action. So indeed, the conversation is needed, but we need to move from here. And I was remembering that there is a moment when Leilena said during the documentary that the only way to get through things is talking about them. That's what we're trying to do here today, to have all your voices together to talk about this issue. And I would like to point out to Leilani, you've been working on the right to access to housing around the world. Do you find patterns in different countries? And how do you think the situation has evolved over the years, and how these particular crises can affect to the problems that you have seen across the world?
Thanks, Beatrice, for the question and for inviting me here to talk to two of my favorite people to talk about this issue with, Frederick and Saskia. I think it's so interesting, Frederick, documentary filmmaker, Saskia, professor, sociologist, and me, a human rights lawyer, and yet the three of us from very different domains all on the same page. So it's super, super cool. And I'm really interested to talk to Mr. Timmermans. I've heard much about you, so I'm looking forward to that part of this discussion. So patterns, global patterns. Actually, I want to answer the question a little differently than I normally do. Rather than talking about all the woe that I've seen around the world repeatedly in every country, it is all the same. What I would say is this: the global pattern is that housing is both a driver of inequality and a consequence of inequality in every city that I've been to. That's a pattern. Another pattern is that tenants, people living in homelessness, people living in grossly inadequate housing like informal settlements, are starting in new ways and in bigger ways to mobilize and claim their right to housing. And the third pattern I've seen is that some governments and government officials are starting to respond positively, to recognize that housing is a human right and not a commodity, and that they have accountability and a responsibility to do something. And I point specifically to the EU Parliament last week that embraced the right to housing and many elements of it. And I'm super happy to talk to Mr. Timmermans further about that, although I know that was the EU Parliament and he's with the Commission. But nevertheless, those are the three patterns, I'd say.
I think it's very interesting when you mentioned about housing being a driver of inequalities and at the same time a consequence, because I think this is very important to take into consideration when we talk about the problem. It's something that we need to tackle in itself, but we also need to tackle the causes of those inequalities that led people to having difficulties in accessing housing. I'd like to talk now to Saskia. You've written a lot about this issue. In 2014, you published Expulsions, where you reflected on how income inequality, unemployment, growth population led to actual expulsions of people from their livelihoods, their cities, even their jobs. Is this housing crisis the ultimate representation of this economic brutality? And how do you think that the COVID-19 crisis can fit into this analysis that you made so many years ago?
The housing question is, of course, a very old question. We all remember some significant figures of the past who were already talking about the housing question. What I found extraordinary when I got to know Leilani and Frederick is the way they engaged it. You really went into what I like to think of as the innards, the insides of a condition, rather than just the outsides. that there are a whole set of issues that don't necessarily have to do with housing per se, but which are now being deployed onto the housing question. Why? Because you can transform any building into a set of assets that you can buy, sell, in other words, into a very abstract instrument. And our eyes and the average person who lives in a city and sees these buildings can't see what is really happening because it's invisible, because it exists in the financial markets. So the housing question, as per Engels and Marx, was quite different from the housing question today. But when all is said and done, one aspect, and that's a bit different from what I just talked about, is how important the housing question is. No matter the regimes, no matter what stage in our long history, the housing question is always there. It goes back millennia. And so then to capture the particularity of this current moment, which Leilana and Frederick capture so incredibly well, that is quite a contribution. And also it captures the specificity of this moment, because there are going to be other modalities, sooner or later. I'm at risk of giving you a lecture, so I'm stopping talking now. Better.
Thank you so much for your contributions. And I think that the fact that you all talk about the need for action, or the action that is being taken right now, it leads perfectly to give the floor now to Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans. And you were mentioning, Saskia, about all those many different issues that somehow touch housing as well. Climate is one of them. So I am sure that Vice President has a lot to say about that. Please, Executive Vice President, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to say in 2 minutes what I would like to say, which would take half an hour. So I'll try and concentrate my remarks. First of all, it's an amazing film, and I hope it will be viewed by millions because it needs to be seen. Secondly, there are long-term trends and there are some urgent things that are happening right now. The long-term trend, of course, is the mistake many of us made, let's say in the 1980s, believing that bringing things to the market would benefit everyone. Especially also social housing. That didn't work out well, I can say. And you have enough comparison material in Europe. There are cities who decided in those privatization waves to privatize, and there are cities like Vienna who decided not to. And if you compare these cities today, you can still have very high quality, affordable housing in a very expensive city such as Vienna, because public control over housing was maintained for social housing purposes. It's just one example, but I think that's the long-term trend. But it's a long-term trend that not only affects housing, it affects many things in public goods and in public services, the belief that the market can do better. And in some areas, the market could, but in many areas, we were mistaken, and the market was brutal at the expense of those who are not strong enough to withstand the brutality of the market. And housing is a perfect example of this. Now, I'll let many things aside now, but I want to concentrate on now. And now, I think we're in a perfect storm because across Europe, especially younger people, even younger professionals, cannot afford to live in the cities where the jobs are. Just imagine what that means. They cannot afford to live in the city where the jobs are. The country I know best, we have huge problems in education in the big cities because the teachers are there, but they can't live near the schools because the housing is not affordable. I'm not even talking about police people or people in healthcare, etc. That's a first problem. Housing is one of those things in your life where you need a bit of security, a lot of security if it is there, like with health. Like with jobs. And now we're in a perfect storm because our health is threatened, our jobs and economic security is threatened, housing is a huge problem, is threatened. And on top of that, we are now a first generation coming to adulthood that was raised with the issue that perhaps our existence is finite. because of the climate crisis and the ecocide that is threatening. So can you just imagine what this means, even if you cannot always articulate individually these things, what they mean in terms of insecurity? So what do we need to do as policymakers? Bring back more security. One of the elements, of course, is in healthcare and vaccines, etc. But housing is a crucial element. Reforming housing, assuring that we tackle the risk of energy poverty, assuring that we improve the quality, assuring that we improve the availability of social housing is going to be a crucial element for our societies and our social contract to survive. Even in one of the richest countries of Europe, young people are now taken to the streets with only one issue in their minds: havoc, to create havoc. Not even directed, but havoc. Express a profound sentiment of unhappiness. And I think we underestimate the dynamic, the undercurrent in our society. We still have time, we can address it, but I measure the time in terms of years, not decades. And we need to act now. And one of the areas where we need to act very quickly, and I'll be happy to go into details, is the issue of affordable and available, sustainable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. I would like to see who of our speakers would like to join first and ask a question to the Executive Vice President. Who would like to go first? Otherwise, I have my questions. Always happy to jump in. Leilani?
One of us, yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
For Mr. Timmermans related to the EU Green Deal, which I think you have no small part in working on. How much attention would you say is paid to housing in the EU Green Deal? And one concern I have that I've encountered through this work on financialization of housing is that some of the big institutional actors in the area of housing use renovations as a way of removing tenants and in fact increasing rents and making those units unaffordable. And for me, I have a real concern because of course I believe in climate justice and Green New Deals and all of this, but I also worry that if left unregulated, these big actors like Acelius and Vonovia, and there's many, many more, can use renovations to make things more green, make units more green as a way of jacking up rents or increasing rents and removing tenants. So have you grappled with that, or are you thinking about that as you move forward with your Green Deal?
Absolutely. Of course, I have always to start with a disclaimer in my position that much of this is not in the hands of the European Commission, but in the hands of the member states and sometimes even municipalities. But that's a disclaimer I simply have to make. Having said that, I think it is across the board, it becoming increasingly clear that there is a new need for governance, which is political governance, which is not the market. And I think the area of housing is one of the main areas where this is going to be visible. And I think very soon, because we have to double our efforts to reduce the energy use of housing in a way that does not lead to an explosion of cost and that brings energy bills down so housing stays affordable. It is possible, but to do that, you need to govern that. You need to create a system of governance where public authorities, financiers, small and medium-sized enterprises who are going to do the work, those who provide the materials for that work, those who have the ideas of how you re-engineer energy systems, those who create the bigger physical infrastructure, biking lanes, charging stations, etc., for the surroundings. You know, this is a systemic challenge that needs a systemic response, which should be done under public authority with democratic control. And that's the challenge we see now. And if we don't do it in that way, then indeed a number of huge predators will jump on our renovation wave and just make a lot of money with it without consideration to the social goals we want to achieve.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. Frederick, go ahead.
Well, first of all, as a filmmaker, I'm happy when Mr. Timmermans said that millions should see the film. Actually, already millions have seen the film, But it would be cool if we together could organize more screening, so to keep this debate, because in some countries we've been really successful and created a perfect storm in the debate. So in countries where actual legislation has changed, like in Denmark or in Berlin or in Spain, the film has been shown a lot. So it's and also Leilani has been very present. So that's one little thing. Can we do something together? And of course, the big issue is these financial actors, they're moving in, and it seems hard for cities to do something because it's very much on a national level. So is there anything you can do from your position to regulate the financial actors, because their movements are really, they're destroying cities as we know them?
But what we do in the recovery plans is demand of member states to come up with plans, with concrete plans, including for the renovation wave. For this, we depend on them and on the member state. But at the same time, what I try and do, and I had just a couple of hours ago a long talk with the mayor of Paris about this, I try and engage directly with mayors in the cities and also try and create synergies between the mayors, because these people have amazing plans to green their cities, to offer more social protection, because they see that if they don't do that, they're sitting on a bomb, time bomb, social time bomb, and housing is very much linked to that. So what I'm trying to do is also empower local authorities to have a stronger voice when formulating these national recovery plans. And then we will have to use democratic means, because member states and their parliaments will have to decide this, to make sure that there is enough public control of that. And I'm not overly optimistic that this will happen in all member states, because in some member states, the almost religious belief in markets is still there. Although I think it is changing across the board. I mean, even if I look at my own country, where the market was even in my own political movement to some point was seen as sacrosanct or as a solver of problems. Now even the right-wing parties are moving in a different direction. So there's hope. But, again, this is what I'm trying to do. And this is what I'm trying to bring together. At the end of the day, I don't have the power to enforce it. On the other hand, what we call taxonomy, which is a tax system that needs to be greened. Taxonomy can also be used to stimulate investment in the right direction and correct if that investment is just for profit.
Thank you very much. And I think it was very, very important that you pointed out the question of engaging with local authorities, because we have seen that in many, many issues, we find the most progressive forces, but also those who are closer to the citizens and know more about their needs in those regions and cities. Maybe Saskia, you would like to have a reaction to what Secretary Vice President said?
Well, I agree with everything that was said so far. Now, maybe there are some people that haven't spoken yet who might have, a very different analysis, but I certainly like, and Frans Timmermans, yes, it's just great that you can, that you're part of fighting this battle. But I think, I think that one has to also mobilize the local settings within which people exist, most people, exist in sort of fairly localized settings, and that they can build trust among themselves, and that they can understand that the arguments, say, that Leilani and Frederick have put out, that this is something they can also participate and execute, in a very partial way in their neighborhoods. I think that is what is missing in our current societies, is that people feel that they are not actors of what is happening. And they are actors, it's just that they haven't acted yet. And so, how do you get people to actually organize block by block? It could be, we have had historic moments when it went that way. And Vienna, for instance, is a good example, the insistence on a certain type of housing. It goes back a long time now, but still. But really, I think that mobilizing people, allowing people to understand that they have voice when it comes to the housing question. Now, Pace, all of this, very good. It is true that more and more people in a country like the United States, in its major cities, we have more and more people who are retiring from their jobs. They're, 70 years old, 65 years old. And guess what? They cannot afford housing. And especially in certain parts, not of course in the whole of the United States. Well, this is a terrifying fact that people who have had normal jobs, they retire and they are sleeping on the street. I mean, you see this in LA to an extreme, but it's happening, and in New York, it's happening everywhere. This is unbelievable. How could it get to this? How is it possible that people, who had regular jobs, who worked hard, etc., that they wind up on the street? And these are people, of course, who are in their 60s or 70s. So that is just one example that illustrates the extreme conditions that we face. There are many situations that are not as extreme as that, but that extreme condition also exists, and it is not going away. It is growing. So that is an indication that here we need action. We need interventions that have not yet happened. This is not an easy challenge, of course.
I think it was very interesting to see all these inputs that you had on your side. I'd like to give the floor back to Frederick, maybe.
Thank you, Saskia, and thank you, Frans Timmermans. There's a lot of things up in the air. I think when you talked about, Mr. Timmermans, about the market and the love of the market that also Social Democrats embraced in the 80s and 90s, and of course there is now a big backlash of that. It's the fight we have to take is also about language, because these market powers, they are also creating the political language, and so it's very much about creating a political counter language. And I think that's what we've been doing. Leilani is very successful in putting it out all the time that housing is a human right, and that language is not picked up globally much. I mean, since the film has been out, so you can see that you can actually change the language.
That's right.
Also, when I remember we had a screening in San Francisco at an amazing big theater, and a young woman came up to me after the screening and said, "Frederick, I feel less lonely now when I've seen the film. I thought it was my fault that I couldn't fit into the system. Now I understand that it is actually a global disease."
Right.
That is the emotion about a lot of young people out there. And I think if a political movement or political parties actually can tell people that it's not your fault, it's actually, this is a creation. This is a model that has failed, the political model that has failed. And I think it is totally a moment to build these movements and also help to give these movements some kind of direction, because it's the market language is out there, and as the stock market goes so fine right now, so still a lot of young people think that if you play your cards well, you can be on the good side. It's like it's still out there. So it's a good moment for good politicians now, and I welcome you all up.
Because I know for Frans Timmermans, citizens are very important, and it's very close to his heart, trying to have a dialogue with them and picking up a little bit on these reflections that you were making, but they need to actively engage and to create this movement. And also because I wanted to build up a little bit on what Leilani said as well about this resolution on the European Parliament. We do know that the European Union does not have competencies when it comes to housing, but I was wondering, what do you think, Executive Vice President, that you can do to encourage member states to tackle these issues? Because I know that housing is very important to you as well. And how do you can engage with both local, regional, and national authorities to make sure that this is back on the top of the agenda, especially because it's going to be a huge problem over the next few years?
Well, just quickly, a couple of points. My first point is this. If you want, this is my, core of my political philosophy. If you want to build up solidarity in a society, you can't organize it bottom up. You can't organize it top down. You start in the middle, and then it radiates both ways. So you have to give, especially the middle classes and lower middle classes, an idea of where you want to go and what their place is there. And I think this is where it went wrong in the last 30 years. There is a feeling of being orphaned in society of quite a substantial part of the people who are most important in any social contract, the middle classes. So also in the housing problem, I would start there. And then if you look at the most successful forms of social housing in Europe, it is not just building for the poorest. It is indeed starting in the middle and then lifting up society towards a better situation. And then you will have solidarity that people don't want people to live in the streets anymore. My second point is this. We can approach this from a moral position, but it's about time we went back to the traditional way of also approaching it from a economic and security position. Maintaining the housing crisis is going to affect profits, is going to affect businesses, is going to affect the way our economy functions, is going to prevent people develop the skills to be in the workforce. And so also there, the people who themselves have no problem with their housing have an interest, a self-interest in providing housing for others, because those are the people who are going to have to be skilled to take the jobs, and they can't be skilled if they don't have decent housing, etc. So I think that's also an element to bring into the debate. The third element I really have to bring into the debate, because we haven't talked about this yet. Look at how society is developing. Look at what we're doing. What we're doing means that to be economically successful or to be productive or to be happy, in the future, you will need less to be present in the biggest cities, especially with people with higher professional qualifications. Distance is no longer such a factor. So you could create alliances between cities and rural areas, because I see the two most dangerous chasms I see in our society are between highly educated and lower educated people, and between cities and rural areas. And they're increasing, and we quickly need to bridge both. And I think with the technological revolution, with this industrial revolution, we could get it completely wrong and create a small group of winners and a huge group of losers, but we could also get it right and solve some of the huge problems we have with over-urbanization, which is, I think, also a challenge today. And we could create alliances between urban and more rural areas. And when I say rural areas, I don't just mean, farmland. I also mean smaller cities where pessimism is tenfold higher than in big metropoles, etc. Because all the successful and optimistic people move to the biggest metropoles and they leave the smaller cities with the older industries, etc. So that's where I believe the recovery and the Green Deal could be a huge contribution, because we're mobilizing so much money now. If we spend that in the wrong way, we will exacerbate our problems and never solve them. But if we can spend it in the right way and solve some of these issues, then I think we can also tackle the housing challenge. And I'll stop here.
There, the Commission has a very important role to play in the application of the national programs. Leilani would like to react to what you were saying.
Yeah, I'm going to react to a few things that have been said. I agree that we need to support and help build movements. I believe that cities and regional governments are part of the solution. But to be perfectly honest, I want the attention focused on national governments. Mr. Timmermans, you said yourself that it's national governments that have the tax power, and my research leads me to national governments, in my opinion, abusing their tax powers in so many ways that have allowed for the financialization of housing to occur. And I take issue with wanting to, I think people are speaking loud and clear. Yes, let's build movements. I think cities are speaking loud and clear. There is a global housing crisis. It is exceptionally urgent. We can't wait, and I take issue with this, we cannot wait for the middle class, if such a thing exists anymore. We cannot wait for the middle class to be upset that there's homelessness on their streets before we act. Homelessness is an egregious violation of the right to housing, period. And there's no other way of looking at it. It is a failure of governments to implement the right to housing. That is what homelessness is. And governments have signed and ratified a whole bunch of treaties at the international level saying that they believe housing is a human right. Governments have committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, all of which leads us down the path of having to solve homelessness on an urgent and priority basis. And we have to make the link between financialization, which is happening way up here, and homelessness, which is on our streets. I can't say with more urgency in my voice, the issue of homelessness and people losing their apartments, being evicted, threatened with eviction, it is so urgent. And the pandemic has exposed that, because all of those people's lives are in the balance now. And it's national governments that have the capacity to do something about this now. And really, I don't think we can wait for the middle classes to be upset I don't think that's where a human rights focus would have us. I agree with you, Mr. Timmermans. We need to spend money in the right way. And I would say we need to spend money in a way that ensures human rights outcomes.
Can I just say, when I say you need to mobilize the middle classes, I'm thinking in terms of how democracies work. If you want these things to happen, you need majorities. And to build the majorities, I think that usually starts where I said it would start. And of course, you're absolutely right in your analysis that it's urgent and it's unacceptable. But to act upon the fact that it's unacceptable, we need to create majorities. That's how it works in these countries. And solidarity always has a hard core of self-interest. Let's be very clear about that. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But you have to see your self-interest in doing something for somebody else. And that's where I think, the pessimism that is so dominant in the middle classes, which is I can only lose. If you believe I can only lose, they can only take away things from me. You don't give anything to anybody else. You just hold on to everything you have. And I think that's been plaguing us. And some politicians play on that. We've just seen that in the United States and elsewhere. And so to share with somebody else, you only do that if you have at least a modicum of optimism about your own position. And that's why I plead for working on the middle classes, not because I have a lot of time, because we have no time. We have a window of a couple of years, also with the climate crisis. But that's why I plead for this, because that's, in my view, how democracies work.
I'm going to give the last time the floor to our speakers if they would like to ask a final question, so that we can have a last remark from the Executive Vice President, because I think he needs to leave. And because we have to close this panel that has been extremely interesting, I didn't want it to stop you because I was enjoying very much the conversation. But maybe Frederick or Saskia, you would like to react very quickly?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just to inform you that Leilani and we have a podcast called Pushback Talks, where we have been over 25 episodes been talking about updating and deepening the stories from the film Push. And now I wonder, as we have Mr. Vice President here, we would like to invite you to our podcast so we could talk a little bit more. So is that okay? We'll try to contact you. So that's, and I agree in a lot of what you're saying. So it can be interesting and maybe also very practical. But thank you for being here.
That's maybe a final word. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think that what we also need is a bunch of people, and I'm mostly thinking about certain kinds of intelligences who decode the way this financial system functions. Because the way this financial system functions, it can extract from even that which the average middle class, well-informed person thinks that's a lost case. That's a very poorly built building. That is, who would want to live there? That doesn't matter. When you can financialize it, it renders invisible the origins of where it comes from. That means that high finance, they can extract a lot of value from all these kinds of buildings. And we confront here an actor who is extremely powerful, marked by extraordinary intelligences in the people that they employ to do that. The top might not be so intelligent, really, but that is really, the housing question is no longer simply the housing question. The housing question has entered into other domains, and that renders it a bit invisible. So if high finance, if financial firms can, put money into some of these big housing buildings, etc., that's an invisible element. And so well, Melanie, you know how I think about this, right? And I think that is a factor that we need to bring into the picture. It's elusive, it's complex, but it's for real. Yeah, what can I say?
Thank you very much. Final word, maybe, Executive Vice President.
Well, I obviously agree with what you have said, and I see that Fernando Medina is also on our call, and he and I have discussed this very often. And if you look at what he's been doing, and also his predecessor in Lisbon, a city that was so heavily indebted, and they pulled it out of that situation in a socially sustainable way, with a very big focus on housing and on the livability of the city. And perhaps Fernando could tell you, give you some of these examples, because I really admire what he's been doing. And the funny thing is, hardly anybody in Europe was hit harder than young people in countries like Spain and Portugal by the previous economic crisis, which is only just behind us. And they lost their housing. They had to move back to their parents. Very often they moved out of the country out of pure necessity in the case of Portugal. And then Lisbon, when things picked up again, Lisbon was immediately like a magnet attracting them again, because Fernando had created the right incentives for that and the right conditions. So I wanted to end, because I saw him here in the picture, to give him the due compliments for what he's done. And perhaps he can help you with some of the examples of what Lisbon has successfully done. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. You've done my job easier by talking about the upcoming speakers, because indeed what we're going to be addressing afterwards is the local experiences. But before we do that, I would like to thank every one of you, Executive Vice President, Leilani, Frederick, and Saskia, for your contributions. It's been incredibly interesting following your debate and being part of it. We're going to keep Frederick, Saskia, and Leilani. They're going to be part of the second conversation. Executive Vice President has to leave, but thank you again for your contribution. It's always great to have you on board. And
it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So now we're going to move into the second panel of this webinar, and we're actually going to talk about those local experiences, those local regional leaders that have been trying to change the situation in their places, to try to make more accessible housing for people and more livable their cities and their regions. And we are going to do it with a number of mayors that are going to join us via a video that they recorded for us. And the first one who is going to do it is someone we've been talking a lot about. He's Michael Ludwig. He's the mayor of Vienna, and he's also a member of the Party of the European Socialist Group in the Committee of the European Regions.
Muchísimas gracias por invitarme a participar en esta Housing Week, y muchísimas gracias también a Leilani Fara por su trabajo como relatora por el derecho a la vivienda de Naciones Unidas, y también por este documental Push, que me parece un documental muy ilustrativo de la lucha que estamos librando ahora mismo en las ciudades. La exrelatora Leiliani sabe muy bien que tiene en las ciudades las mejores aliadas para trabajar por el derecho a la vivienda, porque sabemos lo que está en juego, porque sabemos que ahora mismo la especulación con la vivienda es una de las principales amenazas a la vida, a la convivencia, a la democracia en nuestras ciudades. También sabe que Barcelona es una ciudad plenamente comprometida, que trabajamos cooperando con otras ciudades. Por ejemplo, Viena para nosotros es un referente máximo en Europa. Esa política de vivienda, de alquiler social que ha dado miles y miles de viviendas asequibles, para nosotras es un sueño, un referente al que aspiramos y por el que trabajamos. Desgraciadamente en España solo hay un 1% del parque público, del parque de vivienda que sea público y de alquiler, así que tenemos mucho trabajo para hacer para poder parecernos a Viena. Pero también lo que hemos constatado en muchas ciudades, como en Barcelona, es que tenemos menos competencias que los estados en materia de vivienda, tenemos muchos menos recursos económicos, sin embargo, somos la primera trinchera del problema. Es en las grandes ciudades donde se producen miles y miles de desalojos, donde sube el precio de la vivienda de manera descontrolada y, por lo tanto, las ciudades, aunque tenemos pocas competencias y pocos recursos, tenemos que poner mucha creatividad y mucha cooperación para poder actuar, porque sabemos lo que está en juego. En Barcelona, por poneros un ejemplo, ahora mismo estamos intentando hacer mucha más vivienda pública que no se había hecho durante 40 años, pero como que es insuficiente, tenemos muy claro que hay que intervenir también en el mercado privado. Por eso estamos haciendo medidas innovadoras, aunque no tenemos competencias en materia de desalojos, porque los desalojos los regula una ley estatal. En Barcelona no nos hemos resignado y hemos creado una unidad municipal antidesahucios que está mediando y evitando ahora mismo miles de desalojos de familias vulnerables. También hemos confrontado con las grandes propiedades especulativas, como pueden ser los bancos, los fondos buitre, que utilizan la vivienda única y exclusivamente para especular. Les hemos puesto multas cuando han tenido viviendas vacías o cuando han hecho acoso inmobiliario a los inquilinos. Hemos hecho otras iniciativas como regular el mercado privado para que las nuevas promociones de vivienda privada tengan que tener un 30% al menos de vivienda de precio protegido, pero sigue siendo insuficiente. Necesitamos que los estados entiendan que el futuro de la democracia pasa por garantizar el derecho a la vivienda. No es un problema solo de las personas más vulnerables sin recursos, es un problema de todos y de todas. Para tener ciudades justas, ciudades inclusivas, ciudades innovadoras, ciudades que económicamente funcionen, necesitamos garantizar el derecho a la vivienda. Y eso no se puede confiar al mercado privado. Tiene que haber un liderazgo público y necesitamos que los estados protejan la vivienda como un derecho fundamental. La vivienda no es como un reloj, no es como un yate, no es un producto cualquiera, es un bien de primera necesidad. Por lo tanto, hay que regularlo de manera diferente. En ese sentido, creo que hay motivos para la esperanza. Creo que la presión que estamos haciendo en las ciudades está empezando a dar algún resultado. Esta semana pasada conocíamos que el Parlamento Europeo aprobaba un requerimiento a los estados para que se regule el precio de los alquileres privados, algo que ya están haciendo algunas ciudades en concreto, como pueden ser Berlín o París. Por lo tanto, es un paso adelante, pero necesitamos que los estados se lo crean y necesitamos también una Europa fuerte que haga directivas europeas que obliguen a proteger el derecho a la vivienda. Entonces, solo desearos un feliz debate. Espero que vuestro debate sea muy exitoso, que salgan muchas iniciativas y propuestas y desde aquí ofreceros la plena colaboración de la ciudad de Barcelona para conseguir hacer efectivo el derecho a la vivienda.
Not Michael Ludwig. We are very sorry for that. As you might have seen, there was Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona. But now we're actually going to listen to the mayor of Vienna, Michael Ludwig.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vizepräsident der EU-Kommission Timmermans, lieber Freund, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte Frau Professorin Sassen, sehr geehrte Frau Fahrer, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Es ist mir eine besondere Freude, als Vertreter einer Stadt und als Mitglied des Ausschusses der Regionen hier zumindest virtuell bei Ihrer Konferenz mitzuwirken. Und ich möchte die Gelegenheit benutzen, mich ganz herzlich bei jenen zu bedanken, die diese Möglichkeit geschaffen haben. Es ist ein wichtiges Thema. Wohnen ist gerade jetzt in der Corona-Krise von besonderer Bedeutung. Und ich kann mich noch gut erinnern, wie ich 2013 mit meinem Amtsvorgänger Dr. Michael Häupl, damals in meiner Funktion als Wohnbaustadtrat, eine Initiative gesetzt habe, damit wir auch in der Europäischen Union dem Thema geförderten, das heißt leistbaren Wohnraum, mehr Bedeutung beimessen und auch die Frage stellen, inwieweit Städte, Gemeinden und Kommunen ihren Beitrag leisten können, unterstützt von der EU und unterstützt von den Nationalstaaten, hier noch mehr zu leisten, auch für die Menschen. Es gibt in diesem Zusammenhang, wie ich meine, 3 Punkte, die für diese Auseinandersetzung von besonderer Wichtigkeit sind. Das ist die Bedeutung der Städte in der Corona-Krise, zum Zweiten die Auswirkungen auf die wohnpolitischen Herausforderungen und zum Dritten die Perspektive, die wir für Städte und Kommunen im Rahmen der Europäischen Union bieten wollen. Ich beginne vielleicht bei dem ersten Punkt, bei der Frage, inwieweit wir als Städte und Gemeinden unseren Beitrag in der Corona-Krise leisten können. Das sind besondere Herausforderungen, die wir dadurch meistern, dass wir beispielsweise einen Delogierungsstopp verordnen, dass wir uns besonders mit jenen Menschen beschäftigen, die obdachlos sind oder von Obdachlosigkeit bedroht sind, dass wir Zwangsräumungen verbieten und dass wir Mietstundungen vorschlagen, damit jene Menschen, die besonders unter Druck kommen durch die Corona-Krise, nicht zusätzlich noch ihren Wohnraum verlieren. Aber in dem Zusammenhang muss auch nachgedacht werden, inwieweit die Städte und Gemeinden eingebunden werden, wenn es dann darum geht, den Wiederaufbau voranzutreiben nach der Corona-Krise. Und dass bei allen Wirtschaftsprogrammen, die die Europäische Kommission derzeit beschließt, neben den Nationalstaaten auch Städte, Gemeinden mit einbezogen werden, um jetzt schon darüber nachzudenken, wie dieser Wiederaufbau organisiert werden kann. Die Zukunft liegt ganz stark auch in der Investitionsfähigkeit und hier spielen die Städte eine besondere Rolle, auch in den Investitionen, die sie vor allem auch für die regionale Wirtschaft leisten können. Zum Zweiten wird es darauf ankommen, inwieweit es uns gelingt, auch die Wohnungsmärkte in Europa positiv zu beeinflussen. Es gibt deutliche Zeichen, dass die öffentlichen Investitionen im Ausbau des geförderten Wohnbaus zurückgenommen werden. Es gibt ein Ansteigen der Obdachlosigkeit und es werden immer mehr Menschen verdrängt aus ihren angestammten Wohnvierteln. Dem entgegenzuwirken, gegen Maximierung von kurzfristigen Profiten und gegen Hedgefonds, die auf Kosten der Menschen kurzfristige Gewinne schaffen wollen, ist es notwendig, eine gemeinsame europäische Strategie zu entwickeln. Und drittens müssen wir gemeinsam darüber nachdenken, wie die Wohnungsmärkte vor Spekulationen in besonderer Art und Weise im Grundstücks- und Immobilienbereich geschützt werden können. Es gibt hier ganz besondere Projekte und es gibt auch viel Hoffnung, die wir in die Initiativen des Europäischen Parlaments setzen, nicht zuletzt auch durch den letzten Initiativbericht, wo insbesondere mit 100 Leuchtturmprojekten, die die Nachbarschaft in Städten und Gemeinden fördern, sehr viel auch an Hoffnung verbunden ist. Auch wir haben in Wien ein solches Projekt unter dem Titel Smarter Together realisiert, in Kooperation und auch mit Unterstützung der Europäischen Union. Das war ein Projekt, das sich orientiert hat am ökologischen Wohnbau, ökologischen Sanierungsmaßnahmen, aber inwieweit wir auch den sogenannten Modal Split zugunsten umweltfreundlicher Transportformen verändern können. Das sind sehr wohltuende Projekte, die zeigen, dass es durchaus möglich ist, hier Schritte gegen eine weitere Kommerzialisierung des Wohnungsbaus voranzutreiben, bis hin auch zu einer Bewegung für ein neues europäisches Bauhaus. Es braucht stabile Rahmenbedingungen, die wir schaffen wollen, nicht nur auf nationaler Ebene, sondern auch im Rahmen eines gemeinsamen Europas. Und wir müssen uns da besonders zur Wehr setzen gegen den Ausverkauf unserer Städte, den manche internationale Hedgefonds betreiben. Wir stehen da in einer direkten Konfrontation und in einem Mitbewerb mit Privaten, die natürlich an unmittelbarer Gewinnmaximierung interessiert sind. Von daher bin ich überzeugt, dass auch die Konferenz einen wesentlichen Beitrag leisten wird, sich auch über die nationalen Grenzen hinweg in einem gemeinsamen Europa zu vernetzen, um vor allem auch die Interessen der Menschen, die Wohnen als Menschenrecht erleben, die eine Wohnung benötigen, auch entsprechend zu versorgen. Und lasst uns mutig sein und hier neue Schritte wagen. Wir haben viel Erfahrung gesammelt in den verschiedenen Städten, aber es geht jetzt darum, nicht nur mit der Corona-Krise umzugehen, sondern auch mit dem anschließenden Wiederaufbau neue Initiativen zu setzen. Da setze ich große Hoffnungen auch auf diese Konferenz. In diesem Sinne wünsche ich viel Erfolg, alles Gute, ein herzliches Glück auf und freue mich, wenn wir uns sehr bald auch wieder physisch begegnen können. Glück auf.
And last but not least, we're going to have a video from Nawal Benamou, who is the State Secretary for Housing of the Brussels region.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Comme de nombreuses villes en Europe, Bruxelles n'est pas épargnée par la crise du logement abordable. Plus de 60% des Bruxellois sont locataires et les loyers ne cessent d'augmenter. Le décalage est de plus en plus marqué entre la lente augmentation des salaires et l'inflation galopante des loyers. De nombreux Bruxellois doivent dépenser plus de 40% de leurs revenus pour se loger. Et pour les plus précaires d'entre eux, c'est souvent plus de la moitié des ressources qui sont consacrées au logement. En conséquence, 49 000 Bruxellois sont inscrits sur la liste d'attente pour l'obtention d'un logement social. Et il n'est pas rare de voir des ménages attendre une dizaine d'années pour pouvoir y accéder. Et la crise du logement ne concerne pas seulement les ménages les plus vulnérables. Les Bruxellois sont de moins en moins nombreux à pouvoir espérer accéder à la propriété. En 2020, dans un contexte de crise sanitaire, les prix des appartements ont augmenté de 8% à Bruxelles. C'est intenable. La crise sanitaire que nous traversons, les conséquences socio-économiques qui en découlent et les mesures de confinement ont mis en lumière les inégalités subies par les Européens. L'inadaptation, voire l'insalubrité des logements habités par les populations défavorisées a enfin fait l'objet d'une attention dans les médias. La crise du logement dans un contexte de confinement généralisé et de télétravail est apparue de manière très concrète. En tant que socialistes, nous devons adresser en priorité à toutes les personnes qui subissent le plus durement la crise du logement. Avec le gouvernement bruxellois, nous mettons en œuvre des actions pour apporter des solutions très concrètes aux Bruxellois d'ici la fin de la législature, c'est-à-dire en 2024. Nous allons attribuer 5 500 nouveaux logements sociaux grâce à des constructions publiques et à des acquisitions de logements sur le marché privé. Plus de 12 500 ménages à revenus modestes inscrits sur la liste d'attente pour un logement social pourront bénéficier d'une allocation pour les aider à payer leur loyer. Nous allons aussi mettre 2 500 logements privés en location à un tarif réduit via le système des agences immobilières sociales. Nous agissons également beaucoup plus efficacement contre les logements inoccupés, d'insalubrité et aussi contre la discrimination en renforçant les contrôles et en poursuivant les infractions. J'ai présenté début de cette année un plan d'urgence pour le logement comprenant 33 mesures que je vous invite à consulter. Alors, chers camarades, les loyers actuels représentent une part trop importante du budget des Européens. Afin que chacun puisse se loger à un loyer raisonnable, nous devons, en tant que socialistes européens, proposer un système crédible d'encadrement des loyers. Ce type de mécanisme existe déjà localement. Je pense à Berlin ou au Luxembourg. Et dans un esprit d'échange de bonnes pratiques, mais également afin de construire un rapport de force qui dépasse le niveau local, je voudrais que nous puissions travailler ensemble à la meilleure façon de freiner l'inflation des loyers sur le marché privé. Les socialistes bruxellois sont à votre disposition pour travailler à un système crédible qui garantit le droit à un logement décent. Je crois que c'est un beau combat socialiste qui répond à un vrai besoin des Européens. Et enfin, pour conclure, je tiens à remercier l'ensemble du groupe PSE pour son invitation et l'organisation de cette semaine consacrée au logement. C'est particulièrement précieux. Merci et à bientôt, chers camarades.
Thank you so much for all those majors that join us via this video. Now we have a number of representatives of local and regional authorities that are joining live to have a debate. We wanted to look into all those different experiences that we have seen at local and regional level, as we were talking about before in the previous debate. Those are very much important. These people are those who are closer to citizens and know their needs, and also the first one to act when there is a housing crisis, and we want to learn from them. The first person I would like to address, I cannot introduce him better than when he has been already introduced by Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans. I would like to give the floor to Fernando Medina and expect him to explain to us what is the marvelous things that you've been doing in Lisbon that has brought all the young people back to their home.
Well, hello to all. Thank you very much for the invitation. And Franz was too generous, so he just put me in a hard position just to keep the expectations. But going directly to the point of this very important topic and of meeting of today, the big issue is that we tried to solve. It was this one: how can we protect the right of people to an affordable, dignified housing? How can we protect that right from the turmoil in financial markets? Because the question is that the housing markets are very dependent on what happens in the financial markets, namely in times of very low interest rates for very long periods. So stock exchange and housing markets are bubble very severely at those periods. And the big question for us is how can we put the right of people of having a good, affordable housing out of the turmoil of the financial market? So that was the big question. And the answer, we made it on two. First, we should be define a criteria of people should not pay for a good housing, should not pay more than 1/3 of their net income. That should be a top. So people should pay on housing not connected with prices of the market, not 20% less than market prices, not 25% less or 10% less, because 20% less of an inflated price is an inflated price with less 20%. It's not going to solve anything. The question is that people should pay in connection with the burden they can have. And 30% of their net income, it was the rule that we put forward. Second, we need to create and grow the supply of a public regulated market on housing. A market that a number of houses that is so significant that could contain the prices on the market, could have a major impact on the prices that the market is producing, and at the same time protects young people and middle classes from the market prices and the fluctuation of the financial market. So having these two issues at mind, the question was, how can we build? How can we renew? How can we make more affordable housings available on this? And when we go to the second, to answer the second, how can we make this? We are putting through everything that we can. We are building new houses. We are renewing houses that are from the city. We are buying houses from state and private offices that we can convert to affordable housing in main areas of the city. And we launch a new program that we call that is called Safe Rent, that we go to the private owners that before the pandemic, they had their houses rented in the Airbnb system. And then we rent them houses, and then we sub-rent it to young people and middle classes, and we pay the difference. So we are paying the difference between the market prices and the prices that people pay to the city. So at the same time, we can assure to the owner that they have a very stable rent during the period. So they are converting short-term houses, short-term rentals that are at the Airbnb. We are converting that to stable long-term contracts. Another area is about regulations. So we are putting forward regulations that on new construction a part of those construction should be put on affordable housing. So we don't have any, we are trying everything. So we are putting each city, as we talk a lot with each other, and everyone is trying to make an effort in connection what is the powers that we have, the different frameworks that we have in our countries, what are the different abilities. Here in the city of Lisbon, we are very, very important owners of land, and we are using that ability. So the process is building, renewal. And when we get the amount of houses that is so big in the market that can make the price, we can say basically that we have our citizens much more protected from the turmoil of the financial markets. Let me finish this introduction. I think I have 3 minutes. I want to be precise on the time. Two very, very important initiatives at the European level that the progressives and socialists, and it's a pity that Timmermans is not here anymore, but I have to congratulate him very, very strongly, because two things are very important. First of all, is that in the recovery plans that were approved to help the European economy after the pandemic, for the first time, it was allowed that money could go to buildings, to housing. It was a rule that we had on the previous cohesion policy till now, is that you could not put any money on building houses. And now you can. And this is very, very important, namely to the metropolitan areas where a lot of people live and a lot of poor people live, working families live, where houses don't have the conditions. So it was very, very important that European money, the money that we are using to recover from the pandemic, could be used to a goal that is to support affordable housing for young people and middle class. Second initiative, and directly made by France, that is very, very important, is that is an initiative that is ruled to apply to the construction materials. We should use this effort on investment on housing to make that the new houses or houses that are renewable are more carbon neutral. We can make it. We know how to make it. It's not rocket science. This is a question of political will. And the way that the Commission is putting forward this dimension is very, very important, because it allows us now to build our program of new construction. For instance, we are building houses that are carbon neutral, or almost carbon neutral, to be precisely. What is a major difference on that? So we have solar panels, electricity is being put on the grid, water efficiency systems inside the water, energy efficiencies in the windows, in the walls, in everything that we have in houses. So combination of money to build houses and initiatives that we could use that money on building houses that help to fight climate change. It's a very powerful idea. And that's what we are doing, and it's very important that that progressives at European level support these initiatives and this agenda. Thank you.
I think it's very important what you were mentioning just right now, because there is an issue that we haven't touched upon during this discussion, which is energy poverty, which is a major issue that is linked to housing as well. And it was very interesting that you were putting these two sides of the story that we often talk about when it comes to housing, is whether we should be building more houses or houses are regulating, and you are doing both. I'm very much looking forward to hear what our other speakers have to say about this way of tackling the issue. Now I would like to give the floor to Ellie Exlane. She is Vice President of the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy, and she was a member of the European Parliament before. So I'm very much looking forward to hear from her experience on a regional level, but also how do you bring together both the European and the regional level together when it comes to tackling housing problems. Please, Ellie, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot to the PES for the invitation to this very good occasion to confront ideas. I perfectly agree with what I heard from Fernando just a second ago, and also with the need to keep together the, let's say, social and environmental justice, in line, by the way, with what the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development asks us to do at each government level. The pandemic has certainly increased dramatically inequalities and also generated new needs. needs that need a new and stronger answer to, for example, to prevent the risk for evictions. There are many people who are now risking to lose their houses. People have a fundamental rights to affordable and good homes, and this should be at the very core of the vision to rebuild after the crisis and the pandemic. What we are trying to do in Emilia-Romagna is to adapt and innovate all of our instruments of support. We have put 30 million on support to rent since the beginning of the pandemic. In the broader picture of a comprehensive plan for housing, acting on different sides. First of all, we gave the possibility to access a regional support for rent up to 1,500 euros, which is proportionate to the loss of income caused by the pandemic. And we broadened also the access to this contribution by increasing the so-called equivalent economic situation indicator. It has been extended, obviously, practically doubled, because there are people that for the very first time were in difficulties for paying their rent. So we have tried to build these proportionate contributions for rent because it's the best way, according to us, to give to different needs, give different answers and proportionate answers. We think it's the best way to avoid social tensions and divisions in difficult times like these, because it's a way to act at the very roots of inequalities. It means giving people the answer according to their needs. It's a different situation, the one of, let's say, a worker that had, for example, an unemployment scheme, and the one of a seasonal worker that didn't even see the income for the months of the lockdown. So we have tried to give proportionate answers, but we took even a step more, putting together two different difficulties. We incentivated strongly renegotiation of the rent for those owners who decided to lower the rent for at least 3 months and at least of 20%. Again, with proportionate contribution. If it's longer, even better. And if it's lower, even better. So the strongest incentive was to up to 3,000 euros in case of a house that was used before for short touristic rents, and the owner decided to rent it for 5 years at affordable price to a new family looking for a home. So again, we find similarities with what Lisbon is very effectively trying to do, to promote the conversion of part of the short-term holiday market after the exponential growth of this last year, particularly in touristic cities. And we are trying in this way to rebalance and lower the prices of the rents. We also started a multi-annual extraordinary plan for public residential building rehabilitation and maintenance with 10 million for 2020 for quick renovation up to 25,000 euros. Again, also here, renovation, but also energy efficiency interventions that must be completed within 3 months and within 2 months assigned to people and families who have their right to a public social house, but still don't have it. It means that by February, we expect 300 to 500 new families will have a public house. Among the objectives of our region, Emilia-Romagna, is that of stop land consumption. This means that for now, this program aims at requalifying and regenerate existing assets and not building new ones. In addition, there is a new relevant national instrument, which is the Green Super Bonus of 110% for energy efficiency, which the Italian government has promoted and can be used not only for private buildings, but also for public housing. It's a win-win strategy because looking at the social and environmental justice at the same time, families and enterprises spare money in energy bills, but at the same time, they reduce emissions and contribute to our climate goals. So I have to say the Italian draft for the Recovery and Resilience Plan already contains programs to improve and strengthen public social housing with about 2 billion, but the plan has an objective to improve energy efficiency of 1% of the building stock, whereas the European Parliament in the the recent resolution has correctly pointed out the need to work at least on a 3% of the building stock per year. So there is room for improvement, and we will tell it to the government as well. Last but not least, we also started a program for supporting young couples in buying or renovating houses in the mountain areas with contributions up to 30,000 euros. And we received, you can imagine, 2,300 requests, which would require 5 times the funds. So we will refund it. But it is also an effect of COVID-19. Many people are rediscovering internal and mountain areas. It's a way in which we want to fight the tendency to leave these areas and rethink our territorial development and cohesion. So these are a little bit the points. We also want to broaden our range of instruments this year, by inventing new ways in which the region can play a role of public intermediation in the access to rent, incentivizing the owners that have houses that are empty to put them rent market at affordable price, like, for example, with public rent agencies that are already active in some municipalities, a system to connect supply and demand, and also to guarantee a fair access. Let's be frank, it's also true that we have problems for vulnerable groups, immigrants or LGBTI people, because there is discrimination in finding housing. So we have to find new ways to fight it. And we're asking also the national government to remind that together with green transition and the digital transformation, there is a third priority that must drive the investments of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is social cohesion, which means investing on social infrastructure, starting from social housing and also innovative solution of co-housing and senior housing for the elderly.
Thank you very, very much. I found very interesting that you both mentioned the question of how to reuse touristic housing during the crisis period, but I will be very much interested in knowing how do you make of that not a temporary measure, but something that you embody in interaction when it comes to housing. And I thank you very much for mentioning the question of discrimination, which is something, again, that we haven't talked about during this debate, but it's very much important because indeed many people cannot have access to housing just because they are discriminated on the basis of gender or sexual orientation or of origin. And I think this is a very needed discussion in Europe because we often don't have it. But we come from the south to the north. I'm going to give the floor now to Eric Pilling. He's mayor of Uppsala in Sweden, I think.
Yes, in Sweden. Thank you very much. It's a really interesting discussion, and I'm really happy that we have this debate and that we all saw this movie. Fredrik is from Sweden as well, and it has been discussed quite a lot also in his own country. And it's quite obvious that we have been too naive also in Sweden, and all too market oriented. So I mean, a solution starts with changing that. I mean, we need a market, we need the private investments also in the housing sector, but we can't trust the market to solve this for us. We need really more politics, because at least in Sweden, one big part of the problem is that this problem has been privatized, that each of us should solve this for ourselves and not solve it together as a society. So I mean, we need to seek and introduce collective solutions if we really want to see a change. And I also really think that we also need to work on the state level, but on the same time we can't wait for the state or the states to change. We need to do something on the local level, and we can do a lot on the local level, but we will never change it completely on the local level. I mean, we can go a certain distance and we can do a lot, but I mean, we also need the national parliaments, the European Parliament, the European Commission to change regulations and to regulate the financial system if we really want to see a change. Well, in Uppsala, we work really hard and actively to create housing for all, because we have a lack of housing for many people, and we have also a lack of affordable housing for many people. So the first thing we need to do is, of course, to increase the supply of housing. We need to build a lot, and we have been doing that the last couple of years. But we can also see that that isn't enough, because still a lot of people can't get into the housing market. They can't buy, or they can't afford the rents. So we also need to diversify the markets. We need to find more alternatives for people so that they can get in on the market and can get their own house. And one big topic for us is to find different solutions for the renovating issues, because we are building new houses, and to build new is always more expensive than the older houses. But at the same time, we have these renovations that increase the rents of the existing houses, and it ends up that there is no houses at all for the people who can't afford the big rents or to buy for themselves. And what we can do on the local level is, of course, to use the land ownership. On the local level, we often own a lot of land. And if we use that ownership strategically, we can really create a change. Because we can, instead of just selling it out, we can demand and put demands on the companies that buys the land from us. We can demand that they, to start with, construct rental houses, and we can also demand that they build affordable rental houses, for example, and we can also enable different types of building. For example, in Uppsala we work with building communities, people getting together, building houses for themselves without the interest of profit. Cooperative rental housing is also being built, and on the land that the municipality owns. So that's a few examples what we can do with the tools that we have on the local level. But I want to return to the fact that we can't change it on a systematic level if we don't get the national parliaments to act. Because to really get the human rights of housing to become reality, I mean, we need to understand that it will cost something, and we need to pay it with the tax system, and that's a decision of the national government and the national parliament. But the debate is going on, and I think that we will see change coming. Thank you.
You say that there's not much that you can do, but you actually are doing a lot at local level. But of course, we need to tackle the issues at national and European level to make sure that legislation is there to back what you're doing already. I would like to move back to the civil society again, and I would like to introduce Sorcha Edwards. She is the Secretary General of Housing Europe. Please, Sorcha, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to be here and again to see this this much needed and timely film. And I think, Frederick, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said, when you talked to the man who said, I feel less lonely now. And I think that is really the crucial point here, that we are highlighting the fact that many people are in this position, and that we're all in this together, really. And I think it's even more poignant when we look at this absolutely tragic situation we are all in on the planet, so this pandemic, and it's such a clear message that each person's health is linked to everybody. One person is sick, more of us get sick, and I think this is really what we have to bring home, and it links to just what Eric just said. Housing or health cannot be just left up to the individual. We have to bring it back, these questions back to the societal questions, and look at the joint and common responsibility and see what we can do about it. So I'd like to propose, we've heard really shocking this every time we see the shift, we are shocked, I think, because we hear those personal stories and those human stories. But each time I actually feel prouder for the work we are doing as a team. And we were chatting this evening with colleagues, and we're saying, we feel like we're working for the antidote to this poison that is this excess capital, which is looking for a very short-term profit in a sector that is so necessary for well-being. And we really feel like we're working for the antidote, because every day we hear from organizations that are not extracting, but they are giving back. They are working to build affordable homes, but more importantly, build and protect resilient communities. They are working to do retrofit and try to maintain affordability. And I think sometimes we overlook the fact that there are those in civil society in Europe. I think we're much luckier. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Leilani, but I think we are probably a lot luckier in that respect, in that we have a much stronger fabric of civil society organizations. But I include in that also, let's say, public housing providers, cooperative housing providers mentioned by Eric, also community-led housing provision, housing associations. We are very lucky in Europe in that we have this very rich fabric of different types of organizations that are working to supply affordable housing, but also to manage that affordable housing. And it's something that makes Europe, I think, stand out from other continents and gives at least that bit of extra protection. But I do realize that we are also working against the grain. We cannot, I mean, the work we are doing is a part of it, but of course, within the bigger context of the financialization, it's a risk of getting lost. And I think this is why it's so important to have this teaming up tonight. So with civil society, with those public, cooperative, social housing organizations, but teaming up with the policymakers. I think that teamwork, without the constant adaptation and support from policymakers, and also adapting to different needs on the ground. I think without that teamwork, I think one doesn't work without the other. But I think policymakers don't have to feel overwhelmed, because you can also, of course, there's a lot to do, but you can also do a lot in harnessing that community-led energy on the ground, and the organizations that exist already. There are 46,000 of them throughout Europe. I mean, to varying different degrees. I mean, we heard that tonight. I mean, 24% of the housing in Austria is public housing or limited profit cooperatives that are working in the public interest. I mean, Belgium, drops down to 7%, but we heard the commitments this evening on the work to build that up. In Portugal, it's even at 2%, but again, we've heard this commitment to building up that supply and strengthening those public housing organizations. Just before I came on here today, I wrote to my members in Lisbon, Emilia-Romagna, in Brussels, and they all looked at the program and said, well, all of these guys are really supporting our work and really doing their best to help us build more housing, to help us also buy existing housing, to bring it into the social stock. So I think what's crucial is that also, I mean, we have to take stock of what's happening in that big picture and those risks that Leilani and Frederick and Saskia talk about, but we also have to celebrate, protect, and foster the fabric that is on the ground. So that's the main point I wanted to make. And the other was just to really react to Vice President that we had in the last session and applaud his words. We can't leave this exclusively to the market. And I think that is a real a strong message coming from him in his position. And also the fact that we need a systemic approach. And this is going to be crucial because otherwise we're going to be fighting fires, basically. So I think we really have to sit back, look at the evidence, and also look at the urgency, because I mean, even if we just look to Brussels, where I am now, 50% increase in people using food banks, a massive increase in people on the waiting list for social housing, we're going to see that picture all over. So to look at the urgency of the situation, but also to look at the 750 billion to start with that are on the table from the EU Recovery Fund and how best that can be used, and to really make the argument, look, if we really want to build back better, we build back better on what works. And a part of that is definitely that to fight back against that speculation, against that erosion of our rights and our communities, by fighting back, by building up that stock and protecting the stock that we have as well.
Thank you so much, Socha. I think you linked all together all the things that we've been talking about today. That was absolutely marvelous. Also, the fact that you were mentioning now this question of building this network of people working, but making sure that they work together with policymakers, because otherwise there is no way that we can make a change. We have seen that that works very well at local level. I'd love to see if that could work also at national and European level, because we need to go that step forward. And I think it's also very interesting that, and this is something I would like to hear particularly from Frederick and from Leilani, because they have been traveling across the world. Is this the case? Like we are lucky enough in Europe that we have a strong network of activists, of organizations that are on the ground working for the right to housing, or this is something that is growing all across the world, and now we try to make it and translate it into policy making.
If you want to comment from me, I think this is all very, very interesting. And I think when we look at Europe, we look at the continent where we feel that we have protection. And especially Sweden is like, well, we are safe, we are Swedish. But then suddenly, if you look into it, then you see in the city of Uppsala, Erikstown, you can see Blackstone moving in. You can see the big hedge fund making great business out of the poorest people in our country. So then you can see that our protection system has eroded a lot. Also in Sweden, which means all over Europe, the protection has eroded. So I think we shouldn't be too happy. We've had an amazing politics for many years, but now it's actually been degraded a lot. Another factor I would like to mention, especially since we have the mayor of Lisbon here, and I'm really happy we actually talked about your city and your movements in our podcast also, because we're really amazed by your work. But the role of the criminal money, I mean, with Portugal, with the visa incentives, the golden visas, the country like Cyprus and Malta and others invited criminal money into the countries, and you can see the effects of the criminal money in London, in Amsterdam, in many places. So it's the criminal money, the tax evasive money is rolling around here. And we should remember that all these financial actors that are now taking over the financialized money, they're all operate through tax havens. So you run your cities on tax money, but then the new players coming into your town, they don't even pay taxes. So I would like to hear a little bit about how you want to fight this very immoral money, that because the rest of us have to play by the book, but they don't. Isn't it time to stop that criminal money and the tax evasive money now from entering into our homes?
Calls for national action. Maybe a reaction from Fernando on this one?
Yes. Thank you very much. I agree 100% with you about the need to fight against the illegal money and the criminal money that goes all around the world. And we know already that we together at European level, we have that ability to make that. And basically, there is a lack of political will to go on that direction, because we should have a much stronger harmonization on tax rules and a very clear disincentive to use of the tax regulations and tax loopholes that allows money to come in and come out, to not paying money at all, not paying tax at all. But with the system that we have, it's more or less like competing for the money. And we should never forget when the measures were taken, and in this case it was taken by a right-wing government, but it is not the central point of the issue. Portugal was in the middle of the financial crisis. Our GDP has just go down more or less 7 or 10% because of the austerity programs, and we had 17% of unemployment. And at that time, attracting capital to every sector or to every activity was critical. At this moment, the government just stopped that program, related to the major cities is not working, it is not financing the housing market, anymore. But to be sure is that we cannot live well in a union that works well if we allow different countries to have different rules, that we have different systems, and then who is the one that is going to lose? And I was a young socialist at that time, but I think we lack a great opportunity in the years 2000 when the progressive just rules 15 countries all around Europe in good old days, and we were not able to put a single taxation mechanism at European level. And we shouldn't do that, because the system that we have now, we allow all the countries to make those types of rules. So I'm pretty, I quite agree with you. We should stop this. We should end this competition to the bottom. But with this system, when a country has 17% of unemployment, what should you do? You should not attract that capital that is flowing. And the second is obviously another dimension that is that you stressed, and it was stressed that for me it is most important. The only way that we keep affordable housing in a global world with the free flow of capitals, the only way that we can achieve it is to have a strong supply of public housing. Period. It's not difficult. It's just we need to have strong supply of housing that is out of market rules. Because if all those houses are inside market rules of supply and demand, well, they are integrated and interconnected with financial markets, like you said. That is not the experience in Sweden or in any other country. So that's what we are making now: is putting all that investment in the construction, in the renewal, with a public regulated market, that the prices are not connected with market evolution.
Thank you very much for that, Fernando. I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say that unfortunately some of the tax havens within the European Union have been in the Union forever. So it was a little bit hard to create that harmonization of taxes with them already in the Union. Now, that being said, we are slowly coming to the end of this panel, and I would like to have, if there is any reaction from Saskia or from Leilani on this conversation that we've been having with majors, I'd love to hear from you very quickly. Leilani, maybe? I'm seeing you.
Leilani, you go first.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Saskia. Such an interesting conversation. I think this panel suggests why I've put a lot of stock in cities making change, because it's clear that the problems with respect to housing are on the doorstep of all these cities, and cities are responding positively. And I really admire all of the speakers and all of the ideas and initiatives that you raised. I think at the end of the day, though, we all do know that we need our national governments engaged in this in a more meaningful way across the board. I'm hoping that with Portugal now being at the head of the EU, that the Portuguese government can influence other European governments, because Portugal actually has a very good record on embracing housing as a human right and moving forward that way. I'm not saying they haven't lost their way at times historically, but certainly more recently really engaged in housing as a human right. And the last thing I'll say is that I don't just talk about housing as a human right for fun. I don't talk about it only because I'm a human rights lawyer. I talk about embracing housing as a human right because human rights offers us the way forward legislatively, in terms of how money is spent, in terms of why it's spent, in terms of who is accountable to whom. So using the human rights frame allows city level government and national level government to say to private actors, no, you can't do this in my city or in my country. And you can't do it because we have ratified international law that says you can't do it, that says housing is a human right, not a commodity. The human rights frame strengthens your position. It allows you to dictate what the market can and can't do. The market doesn't exist unto itself. The market is a creation of states. The market is a creation of legislation and tax regimes. And so I feel that's why I keep going on and on about a human rights framework, because it's a useful tool. So anyway, I'll just end there. I'm dying to hear what Saskia has to say.
Thank you so much for that, Leilani. And you know, housing needs it should be part of the Portuguese agenda because they have put social issues at the very core. And I agree with you that the human rights should be the very minimum that we respect when it comes to legislation, right? We should just go from there on top. Please, Saskia, I also would like to hear from you very much.
Well, I mean, housing once was a more protected condition. I think we all know that, right? Today, it has entered the financial system, and hence you can, buy, sell, buy, sell. I think we should make a claim, a strong claim, that housing cannot be reduced to something that can be bought and sold in the markets, just like nothing. I think housing should have a special status. And if there might have been doubt, let's say 30 years ago about that, when things were very different, today, there is no doubt. There is no doubt that when housing enters the options of these financial markets, people lose. And I would argue municipal governments also lose. Because a lot of whatever can be extracted from those financialized conditions of housing, it's not going to wind up in municipal governments either. So I think the data right now are so overwhelming and so many. I mean, again, the simple example, the woman who had a regular job, modest, whatever, she turns 65 and suddenly she has nothing. This is happening. I mean, we have enough examples, enough instances how what is happening now is not working. And of course, people can say, well, it's complicated. Hell no. There is a very simple solution that is not complicated at all. And that is take it out of these financial markets. That is really destroying. And it's not just the housing question that it is destroying. It means that it extracts value from anything that can be financialized, which includes, pigs. And I mean, it's everything right now. These are brilliant instruments, absolutely brilliant, but they have become a negative. And I think that we should somehow get together a group of people who can make that argument and, develop it very solidly. But really, you can reduce the question to something that is quite straightforward in its brutality. Now, there are complications behind all of that, but the brutality itself is actually incredibly clear. The abuse. Okay, I should stop. Leilani, you are laughing.
It was a very nice way to actually wrap up all that we were talking about. Before we close the panel, I would like to give the floor for one last minute to all our panelists, because they've been hearing about all that Saskia and Leilani and Frederick had to say as well. And I would like to have the reaction. So maybe, Ellie, you would like to go first for a quick reaction, 1 minute?
Yes, thanks a lot. It was an incredibly useful also discussion for me, for us. Just two quick comments. I couldn't agree more, even on the idea that this pandemic has shown clearly and to everybody that our welfare is the welfare and the well-being of others. There is no difference. Yes, there is no barrier. Think about homeless people. We had some cases of COVID-19 in some places welcoming homeless people. Some people in the cities have understood only that day that their well-being and the dignity of their welcoming in these houses is something that touches us all. So this is very true. true. And the last point would be on the issue that Frederick raised before. Let me go back to my previous life of MEP, member of the European Parliament of the Socialist and Democrat Group. It's important what he said. We cannot afford tax havens among us without palms in the European Union. And it would be just as easy as Saskia has just told us on housing to realize that in this race to the bottom, people and states are losing, and the only one gaining profits are the ones who are not contributing proportionally to the wellness of the entire society. It is not sustainable. So just two quick fights that I know that the socialists and progressive are continuing in the at the European level is to have a CBCR, a country by country reporting that requires to all enterprises working in the European common market to disclose openly how many profits and how many taxes they pay in each country where they operate within the European Union or also outside, because in developing countries, we have an even bigger problem. That is one of the instruments, and the other one would be harmonizing a little bit more the fiscal system, because in this way, it's just cherry picking, you know? I choose a government, I have an advantage, a fiscal advantage, and we are stealing important resources to redistribute among the people of all the other European partners. It cannot work like that, and we have to continue this fight. Thanks a lot for the occasion, really, and keep going.
Thank you, Eli. Absolutely. The question of taxation is something that we need to tackle if we want to tackle the housing crisis as well. Maybe, Fernando, a quick reaction on this?
No, just very brief, just to thank the opportunity of this panel. It was very good to it's just to reinforce the message that Saskia put us is to assure that housing is a human right. We have to find the ways of assure that the house is out of the market system in the connection of the dimension of pricing, and to do that is not replacing obviously all the market, but is to assure that we have a supply that is big enough, that is regulated with prices that are connected with the ability of people to pay, and not with the prices that the market dictates in one moment or the other. And this is a very, very important political issue. There is no general agreement on this. It is not. And the progressives we have to use this momentum, this opportunity of the recovery funds, of the green agenda to support and to increase, because the next years are going to be difficult, because as we can foresee, the next years we are going to live with very low interest rates. It's not very hard to predict so the floods of money that are going to house market is going to continue bumping. And the only way that we can protect our young people and middle classes is to support with the supply of more and more houses at affordable pricing. So investing, putting European funds on this, connecting this with the green agenda, it should be key. And using all the instruments, construction, building, renewal, regulations, I think we don't need to choose. We need to use all that we can at the same time. It's because there is an urgent need now. In the next years, by sure, we are going, what we saw before the pandemic in all big cities in the world, if you see the prices that skyrocketing all around the world, they can't continue to go up after this pandemic, because the money and floods of money is going to be very high in the market, and we need to supply, to make a strong supply out of this dimension of the market prices, because if we fail on that, middle classes and young people are going to be severely hurt.
As I was saying before, we need to tackle that crisis, not to become firefighters. Thank you so much, Fernando. I would like to give the floor to Eric as well, to have a reaction from him on everything that we've been talking about this evening.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. It has been really interesting, and it's also very inspiring for me to hear the Italy and Lisbon. I mean, quite different circumstances, but the way you tackle this problem is really inspiring also for us in Sweden, and you show that it's possible to actually achieve a change. I mean, this issue has been privatized for so long, almost 20 years now in Sweden. So, I mean, it has not even been a political issue for quite some years. But I mean, it's changing, and it has also been known, except the example of Lisbon. I mean, how quick you can, if you go in with politics, you can change things. And I think we'll see that change also in Sweden and in more countries. So that we can have more positive examples than only Vienna, because Vienna has been the good example since 1920s or so. I mean, we need to have more examples than that. But good discussion, good debate, and very good movie. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope that we can have more and more good examples of all the cities across the world and the EU that are doing their best to guarantee access to housing. And last word from Sorcha on the conversation that we've been having tonight, maybe.
Just thank you very much for organizing this event so early in the year. I mean, I think the Committee of the Regions and the Socialists and the Committee of the Regions have recognized the real urgency. So, I mean, as I said, the growing number of people using food banks. This is really an urgent issue. But at the same time, I think through this session, you've also tried to stand back and say, okay, what are the sustainable solutions to this? What are the long-term solutions to this? So, and I would just finish by repeating your words, Beatriz. So the importance of linking all the levels, and I think that's going to be crucial. And here in Brussels, as I said, the institutions can't stand back and observe this firefighting that the public housing providers, the social housing providers, the cities are doing. We can also look at this, what member states can be done and how they can be influenced also from EU level, whether that's through the deficit rules, making it clear that investment in social, affordable, limited profit housing isn't counted as a deficit but as an investment. We can look at the Services Directive and see how short-term platforms make sure that they are that it is clear that they are working as in real estate actors and not only internet platforms. And these are real levers that we can look at European level. Also looking at state aid rules and giving the flexibility to for local authorities to invest in housing according to the needs on the ground, not only to a limited group of people. So there are levers also at EU level. So I think linking up all those levels is going to be crucial, Beatrice, as you pointed out. So I think that's going to be our job. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It was very inspiring to hear for all the things that you are actually doing at local level, but also it's important to point out to everything that is yet to be done. Thank you so much to all the speakers that have joined us today. Eric, Eli, Fernando, Sorcha, Saskia, Leilani, Frederick. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and listening to you. Your ideas are really inspiring, and it's been great to have you today with us. Thank you again for all your contributions and for the work that you're doing to make this world a better place, and in particular those who are working in Europe. You are necessary. This work cannot be done only at one level, as we were saying. We all need to be part of the change. So thank you again for everything that you're doing. Now I would like to pass to the last session of our webinar today, and for that I'm going to give the floor through a recorded video to the president of the S&D Group in the European Parliament, Irache García Pérez.
Casi un año después del comienzo de la pandemia, la situación para muchos ciudadanos y ciudadanas de la Unión Europea es ya insostenible. A todos nos han recomendado quedarnos en casa. Pero ¿qué le decimos a esas más de 700.000 personas que viven en Europa y no tienen un hogar? Y eso no es una novedad. En la última década esa cifra ha aumentado un 70%. Sin embargo, la vivienda es un derecho humano. Está consagrado en la Carta Social Europea y es uno de los principios fundamentales del Pilar Europeo de Derechos Sociales. Además, es un elemento central de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, los mismos que la Comisión Europea prometió incluir en el semestre europeo. Es hora de pasar de las palabras a los hechos. Por eso necesitamos una acción más firme y concreta por parte de la Unión Europea. En coordinación con los Estados miembros y las autoridades locales y regionales, debe desarrollar políticas para que todos los europeos y europeas tengan una casa digna donde vivir antes del 2030. Durante demasiado tiempo la Unión Europea se ha olvidado de la dimensión social, pero para nuestra familia política el objetivo es muy claro. Defendemos un pacto verde ambicioso y una agenda digital que contribuya a la autonomía estratégica de la Unión Europea, pero eso no podemos hacerlo descuidando a las personas. Creo que a la dimensión social no se le está dando la importancia que merece. Un 37% de las inversiones del Fondo de Recuperación se deben destinar a alcanzar los objetivos del Pacto Verde y un 20% a la transición digital. Sin embargo, no existe la obligación de invertir en el ámbito social ni en sistemas de salud. Y si algo hemos aprendido durante esta pandemia es que estos dos sectores fundamentales no han recibido suficiente financiación en los últimos años. Por eso es el momento de poner en marcha una estrategia europea integrada con un plan de acción concreto que, además de herramientas legales, incluya un calendario para la implementación del Pilar Europeo de Derechos Sociales. Ese plan contemplará objetivos sobre el derecho a una vivienda digna. Es hora de pasar de las buenas intenciones a las medidas concretas y vinculantes para mejorar la vida cotidiana de nuestros ciudadanos y ciudadanas. Y aquí incluyo también la discusión que tendremos sobre la reforma de las reglas fiscales y la necesidad de poner encima de la mesa la regla de oro de la inversión pública. Durante los próximos meses tenemos una oportunidad única, no solo porque la presidencia portuguesa tiene la dimensión social como su principal prioridad, sino también porque en diciembre el Parlamento nos dio un mandato claro para defender esta agenda con la adopción del informe sobre una Europa social fuerte para unas transiciones justas. Los socialistas y demócratas contamos con nuestros colegas en el Consejo, en la Comisión, en el Comité de las Regiones, así como en los sindicatos y en las organizaciones sociales, para que esta cuestión sea una de las prioridades en la Cumbre Social de Oporto que se celebrará en mayo. Y también para continuar trabajando en el contexto de la implementación del pilar social en el futuro. Estoy segura de que esta semana dedicada a la vivienda será importante para la movilización de nuestra familia política, de las instituciones europeas, de los Estados miembros y de las autoridades regionales. Porque nosotros lo tenemos claro. Sin una acción coordinada a todos los niveles no será posible poner fin a esta lacra social. Es el momento de unir nuestras fuerzas.
Now let me switch to French. Je vais donner maintenant la parole au président du PIS
President of the PIS Group, and also to the Mayor of Coulennes, Christophe Rouillon. You now have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beatrice. Thank you for your political message also, and thank you to Frédéric for your film, because thanks to the film, thanks to your emotions, this was food for thought vis-à-vis our commitment, and it's about expressing ourselves when we talk about social housing. Thank you to all of you. I jotted down also the intervention of the Mayor of Barcelona, underlining this will to commit himself for affordable housing for everyone. And that's very important, of course, for us. And thank you also to our colleague and friend, Fernando Medina. We have to make sure that there is no more speculation when we talk about social housing. We need to have enough social dwellings of quality. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for still being here, because it's rather late in the day. Thank you for following the debate. As to what we saw and heard today, as to the interventions also, they underlined one thing: the right to housing is a human fundamental right that needs to be taken away from the speculation market. It has to be taken away from speculation. As to the housing crisis in Europe, it's just not acceptable. Housing is more than a postal code. It's a place where you live. It's a place where we love each other. It's about identifying each other more and more. It's a place where we work also. If we want to give to all the Europeans the same opportunities, we need to give them access to quality housing and affordable housing also. This promise of the European Union is extremely important. Important for our progressive family. It's a priority, obviously. And that's why today we have launched a petition called House for Everyone, Housing for Everyone, and we need to reach results. We are asking the political actors of the European Union, of the member states, to deal with this housing crisis. It's about underlining solidarity and doing what it takes and walking the talk. Thus, could you please sign this petition, this text? It's available on the site of our event, and it's also available on our social networks. Access to everyone for quality housing, affordable housing, it should become a priority for the European Union. I'm saying this because here in Coulennes, in the west of France, this housing priority has been the #1 priority, the absolute priority. I'm very proud that during my 2 mandates, for 20 years now, I have renovated all the social dwellings of my city. Social housing represent 50% of the housing in my city. It doesn't exclusively concern the underprivileged, but also the middle class. Thus, we are asking to defend a universal vision of this right to housing, and it's about making sure that we, in our society, we have taken into account more and more the melting pot of our societies. We need to fight this economic approach to housing. Within the Committee of the Regions and with all our partners, what we're asking for is a pact, a deal, in fact, a European deal that is for housing. These investments will contribute to implement the social European rights platform to reach the objectives of the Green Deal. In other words, to make sure that our union will be a place with more solidarity, more sustainable, and in that sense, we support the initiatives and the positions of our friend Frans Timmermans, European Commissioner in charge of the energy transition. It's the public policies that are expected from our citizens today, and I also believe that our political family is well placed to walk the talk. And it's about doing what it takes, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making efforts, and it's developed a network of cities and regions to act together. Do not forget to follow all the events organized this week. And it's about food for thought, and it's all participate, and it's complete the toolbox. We need ideas. We need to move forward with our cause. We need to convince our citizens. It's about winning the battles. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And it's carry on acting for social, affordable housing, quality housing for everyone. Thank you. I'm sure we are there to support this Green Deal. Thank you for what you said.
For the closure of the event, I'd like to summarize a little bit. We have been talking about today about all the different issues that we are facing when it comes to access of housing at the European Union, but we have been talking a lot about all the many ways in which local and regional governments can do their work to help their citizens to access to housing, but also about all the different initiatives that we need at national and European level to try to make this happen on a wider scale. We are going to keep on talking about that in the coming days, number of workshops organized by the progressive forces in the European Parliament and the Committee of the Regions. We have a panel on concrete actions solutions for social and affordable housing in the EU, another one on the affordable housing initiative in the city of Vienna that we've been talking a lot about during this debate. And we have a workshop as well hosted by the socialists in the European Parliament, and they will be talking about decent housing as well. I would like to thank you all for being here today with us, for staying this long and being part of the conversation. Thank you so much for your participation and for your enthusiasm. And I would like to share with you that you can sign the petition that the President mentioned before as well. If you believe that we all should have access to housing, that the housing is a human right, you can sign the petition. It's published in the website of the Peace Group and their social media. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time, sharing their thoughts and their experience with us, and have a lovely evening.